By 3 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon in October of 1955, there were two machines in Carl Bremer's cornfield that had no business being there and no clear way of getting out. The first was the Oliver 88 Super Combine, which had gone into the soft headland corner of the north field at 11:30 that morning. Carl had been running it through the last standing rows of his corn crop, the best crop in 3 years, the kind of crop that makes a man feel that the previous 2 years of ordinary harvests were simply preparation for this one. When the machine had hit the low corner that everyone who had ever farmed that piece of ground knew to be soft in a wet October, and which Carl Bremer, who had bought the farm 5 years earlier and had not yet had an October this wet, had not yet learned. The combine went in nose first, the header dropping and digging into the soft, dark soil, the rear wheels cutting down through the wet layer and hitting the cold, dense subsoil 2 feet below. The engine kept running for a moment before Carl killed it. Then the field was quiet except for the October wind moving through the standing corn on the west end of the field, and Carl Bremer sat in the operator's seat of his $1,800 Oliver combine and understood what had happened. He called Dale Simmons at the implement dealership in Marshalltown from the farmhouse phone. Dale arrived at 1 o'clock with a brand new John Deere 70 on his truck, the most capable pulling tractor he had in the yard, 44 horsepower, freshly delivered from the factory in Waterloo 3 weeks before. The John Deere 70 made its first recovery attempt at 1:30. It made its second at 2 o'clock, from a different angle. By 2:30, the 70 had dug itself into the soft headland soil deep enough that it was no longer fully useful, and Dale Simmons was standing at the field edge with his clipboard and an expression that experienced implement dealers develop when a machine they have recently sold is in a position it was not designed to occupy. The rain was coming Thursday. The weather report had been specific and consistent about this since Sunday. 2 days. If the combine sat in the soft ground through Wednesday night and the rain came Thursday as promised, the remaining corn would be too wet to harvest for at least a week, possibly longer, depending on how hard the rain came and how long it stayed. A week's delay in a harvest that was already at the perfect moment of maturity meant mold, and mold meant loss, and the numbers attached to that loss were the kind that a man does not run through his head more than once before he stops running them. By 3 o'clock, Carl Bremer had called 3 neighbors with tractors. 2 were unavailable. The third came with a Minneapolis Moline that broke a drawbar pin on its first attempt and went home to get another one and hadn't come back. It was at this point that Harlan Voss came across the field on his 1948 John Deere Model A. If you've ever watched a man laugh at the only thing that could save him, subscribe to this channel. A new story like this one drops every week, and none of them end the way the crowd expected. Let me tell you about Harlan Voss, because the way he came across that field tells you everything you need to know about him. He did not hurry. He came across the harvested ground at the Model A's working pace, a pace that could be described as deliberate or as slow, depending on how you understood the difference between those two things. He had been watching from his own field to the east since noon, had seen the combine go in, had watched the John Deere 70 make its attempts, and had made the decision to come over with a consideration that most men his age would have called careful, and most men Carl Bremer's age would have called too slow. He was 67 years old, and he had farmed 200 acres in Marshall County since 1931. Before that, he had farmed it with his father, Gus Voss, who had broken the ground in 1903, and who had told Harlan everything worth knowing about Marshall County soil by the time Harlan was old enough to drive a team, including the fact that the north corner of what would eventually become Carl Bremer's field drained toward the low point at the headland, had always drained there, and went soft in a wet October the way a man's resolve goes soft when the bank starts sending letters, reliably, and without particular sympathy for whatever you had planned to do that week. Harlan had bought the John Deere Model anew in the spring of 1948. He had considered a used machine, but his father had told him once that a man who buys another man's problems buys them blind, and Harlan had taken this literally and budgeted for new. And the Model A had been in his machine shed and in his fields ever since. 7 years of mornings and jobs that ranged from the routine to the occasions when the ground or the weather or the weight of the work required something specific from a machine, and the machine had to provide it. The specific thing Harlan had asked of the Model A most often, the thing that had shaped his understanding of it, and that was the reason he was crossing Carl Bremer's field right now instead of sitting at the field edge with an opinion, was this. The Model A was the only tractor on his farm that could work the soft ground. Not because it was lighter than his other equipment, though it was lighter, because of the tires. Now, to understand what Harlan understood and what Dale Simmons, who sold tractors for a living and knew horsepower the way a barber knows hair, did not yet understand, you need to know something about what soil does when you put weight on it. Any piece of ground has a bearing capacity. A bearing capacity is the maximum weight per unit of area that the ground can support before it begins to fail, before it compresses and deforms and lets whatever is pressing on it sink through. Soft soil has a low bearing capacity. Wet clay Iowa headland in October has a very low bearing capacity. And the way you calculate how much any machine presses on the ground is not by its total weight alone. It is by its total weight divided by the area of its contact patches, the footprint its tires make on the soil surface. Ground pressure equals weight divided by contact area. The Oliver 88 Super Combine weighed approximately 9,000 pounds loaded. Its rear tires, while substantial for a 1955 Combine, concentrated that weight into a contact area of roughly 160 square inches when the soil was firm. That produced a ground pressure of approximately 56 pounds per square inch. The soft headland corner of Carl Bremer's north field could not support 56 pounds per square inch in an October that had seen 3 wet weeks. The John Deere 70 that Dale Simmons had brought weighed nearly 5,000 pounds with ballast. Its rear tires, standard issue for the machine, produced a ground pressure of approximately 28 pounds per square inch. In the already disturbed soft soil around the stuck combine, 28 pounds per square inch was not enough to stay on the surface during a sustained pull. The 70 had cut through and stuck, as Harlan had expected it would from the moment he saw it drive onto the headland. The 1948 John Deere Model A weighed 3,400 pounds, but Harlan had fitted it with the widest rear tire option available for the machine, an 11-inch wide, 38-inch diameter agricultural lug tire that produced a contact area, on both rear wheels combined, of approximately 280 square inches. Ground pressure, 12 pounds per square inch. Less than half the pressure of the John Deere 70. Less than a quarter the pressure of the stuck combine. 12 pounds per square inch was a number the soft headland corner of Carl Bremer's north field could hold. It was a number that allowed the tires to press the soil rather than cut it, to find the thin load-bearing crust at the surface and work with it rather than through it. Harlan had arrived at these wide tires not through calculation, but through experience, through the accumulated evidence of which jobs the Model A could do in soft conditions, and which ones it couldn't, and through a cold January day in 1951, when he had talked to an extension agent at a county meeting who had drawn a diagram on a notepad and shown him exactly why what he already suspected was correct. He had ordered the wider tires the following spring and had not regretted the expense. Beyond the tires, the Model A's horizontal 2-cylinder engine ran at low RPM. Its tires turned slowly. A slowly turning tire on soft soil does not shear the surface the way a fast-spinning tire does. It presses and releases, finding purchase with each rotation, losing as little of the surface's bearing capacity as possible. The flywheel stored each combustion stroke and delivered it evenly. No torque spike, no sudden jerk that would have overcome the soil's ability to hold the tire in place, and sent it spinning through. When Harlan Voss came across Karl Bremer's harvested corn ground at 3 in the afternoon and pulled up at the field edge beside the stuck machines, he was carrying 17 years of understanding about soft Iowa soil in the wide rear tires of a tractor that most of the men standing at that field edge would have been embarrassed to own. Karl Bremer looked at the Model A and then at Dale Simmons. Dale Simmons looked at the Model A and then at Karl Bremer. Karl said something that produced laughter. Dale's contribution produced more. Harlan climbed down from the tractor without hurrying, walked past them to the edge of the soft headland, and pressed his hand flat into the soil the way he had pressed it into this kind of soil 10,000 times. He felt the resistance. He felt the moisture content. He felt where the soft layer ended and the firmer subsoil began. He stood up and looked at the stuck combine. He looked at the angle of the machine in the soft ground, which side was deeper, where the header had dug in, how the rear axle was oriented relative to the firmer headland soil that began approximately 14 feet to the east. He walked back to the Model A and got the chain off the drawbar. What Harlan did in the next 31 minutes was not complicated. That was, as always, the point. He did not hook the chain to the combine's rear recovery point, the point that Dale's John Deere 70 had used on both its attempts, pulling straight back along the line the combine had entered, fighting the full suction of both sides of the machine simultaneously. He hooked the chain to the left rear corner of the combine's frame, low, at a point that put the pull line at a diagonal angle approximately 20 degrees off the straightback axis. He was not pulling the combine out. He was rotating it, swinging the rear end of the machine toward the east, toward the firmer ground 14 feet away, letting the machine's own weight help the rotation once the suction on the left side broke. Karl Bremer watched him hook the chain and said nothing. Dale Simmons watched him position the tractor and wrote something on his clipboard. Harlan backed the Model A to the edge of the soft headland, not onto it, to the edge of it, keeping his wide tires on the firmer ground where the ground pressure equation was still in his favor, and engaged the chain. Pop, pop, pop. The Model A did not strain. There was no surge, no burst of RPM, no drama of any kind. The engine found the load and the load found the engine, and the cadence did not change. Pop, pop, pop. The same beat it had kept since the morning Harlan had cranked it to life in his shed 7 years earlier. The wide rear tires pressed into the boundary soil between firm and soft and did not move through it. They held. For 3 minutes, nothing visible changed. Karl Bremer started to say something. Then the left rear corner of the combine moved. 1 inch. The chain had rotated the machine's rear axle 1 inch toward the east, toward the firmer ground, breaking the vacuum seal that the soft soil had formed around the buried wheel. And with that inch, the physics shifted. The full suction grip, the grip that had held the machine against the John Deere 70's 44 horsepower, was broken on one side, and the combine began, slowly and without drama, to do what diagonal force asks a stuck machine to do. It rotated. Pop, pop, pop. The exhaust from the vertical stack rose in a thin, patient line against the gray October sky. The wide rear tires held. The chain pulled not against the whole stuck weight of the machine, but against a weight that was progressively releasing itself as the rear axle swung toward firmer ground. The combine groaned, the low sound of a large machine whose geometry is changing, and the rear wheels rolled 3 inches in the soft soil, and then the right rear wheel touched the firmer headland boundary and found purchase, and the combine rolled out of its hole the way a boat rolls off a sandbar when the tide is right. It took 31 minutes from the moment Harlan hooked the chain. He unhooked it, coiled it onto the drawbar, and drove back to the firm headland. Karl Bremer walked out to his combine without saying anything, climbed up, and started the engine. The Oliver fired on the second attempt. He drove it off the headland onto firm ground, stopped it, climbed down, and looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at the Model A. He did not say what he was thinking, but his face said something that it had not said at 3 o'clock when the laughter was easy. Dale Simmons came over to where Harlan was standing. The angle, Dale said, that was the whole thing. Part of it, Harlan said. Dale looked at the tire tracks the Model A had left at the headland boundary, the wide, shallow impressions against the deep-churned ruts of his John Deere 70. He was quiet for a moment. The tire width, he said. Ground pressure, Harlan said. Narrow tire puts the weight in a small spot. Small spot goes through. Wide tire spreads it out. Surface holds. Dale wrote this down. He was a practical man, and practical men write down things that cost them money when they don't know them. I've been selling the narrow tire option on everything, Dale said. I know, Harlan said. He didn't say it as a rebuke. He said it as a fact, the way he said most things. Dale Simmons sold the wide tire option on 31 tractors over the following 3 years. He told every farmer who asked why they should pay the extra cost the same thing. Ground pressure equals weight divided by contact area. He told them where he'd learned it, too, which was the kind of honesty that made farmers trust him more than they had before, which was the point. Carl Bremer finished his harvest that Tuesday evening. The last row came off the field at 5:20, 2 hours before dark, 4 rows from where the combine had been sitting in the soft ground that afternoon. The yield from that final field was the best corn per acre that Carl had ever harvested, a number he mentioned to no one, because the afternoon that had preceded it was still too fresh. He never asked Harlan what he owed him. Harlan never raised it. The following spring, Carl brought a case of oil filters to Harlan's farm and left them in the machine shed without knocking on the house door. Harlan found them the next morning and understood what they were. That was the entire transaction. Harlan Voss farmed his 200 acres in Marshall County until 1971, when a stroke took his left hand's strength and made the open-seat tractor work difficult in ways he could no longer manage. His son Gerald took over the operation. Harlan asked 2 things: that Gerald be careful with the north corner of the Bremer field whenever he helped Carl's son with custom work, because it still drains to that spot, and it still goes soft in a wet October, and that the Model A stay. Gerald kept it. He put wider rear tires on every tractor he has owned since, including the one he bought new in 1978, because his father explained the ground pressure calculation to him the same winter that Dale Simmons heard it in the field, and it had the ring of something that does not stop being true. The 1948 John Deere Model A is still in the machine shed on that farm in Marshall County. It does not do field work anymore, but Gerald runs it twice a year, spring and fall, because his father ran it twice a year, and there was always a reason that was more than habit. Pop, pop, pop. The sound carries across the farmyard on quiet mornings and out into the fields that Harlan Voss worked for 40 years, including the October afternoon when the ground pressure numbers worked out the way they always work out, in favor of the machine that understands the soil and against the one that only understands horsepower. The Oliver 88 Super was a fine combine. Dale Simmons sold 11 more of them in the following 2 years. The John Deere 70 was a fine tractor. Dale sold 23. Neither machine was wrong. They were simply not configured for the problem in front of them, which is not the same thing as being insufficient. It is the thing that happens when a good machine meets a specific condition that its design did not anticipate, and the man operating it does not know what to do about it. Harlan Voss knew what to do about it because his father had pressed his hand into the same soil in the same corner of the same field in 1929 and told him what it was doing, because he had talked to an extension agent in January of 1951 who drew a diagram on a notepad, because he had ordered wider tires in the spring and used them for 7 years and learned through the testimony of the ground what the numbers had already said. Knowledge like that doesn't appear in a sales brochure. It doesn't come with the machine. It comes with the man. Pop, pop, pop. 2 cylinders, 12 pounds per square inch, 31 minutes. The Oliver combine finished the harvest before dark. The two-cylinder era at John Deere ended officially in 1960, when the company moved on to 4- and 6-cylinder machines that were faster, more powerful, and better suited to the scale that American agriculture was becoming. The engineers were right. The salesmen were right. Progress is rarely wrong about its direction. But soft Iowa soil in October does not care about direction. It cares about ground pressure. And it has a very long memory for the machines that understood the difference.